Hi everybody! We are serving new blends with the most creative minds in design and architecture. So let's find out what this episode has in store for us. Your ICED Macchiatos is serving.
Independent and open-minded, passionate about his origins and projected towards the world, an architect that was in touch with the great names of design before he became one of them and was part of the movements that have marked the history of the industrial design. This is Ferruccio Laviani, born in Cremona in 1960, designer who boasts long and significant collaborations with top brands in the sector. From Memphis to Antonio Citterio, 12 years alongside Madalena de Padova, 12 years at Floss, 25 with Foscarini, 28 with Cartel, and more than 20 with Molteni Dada, all or almost all of these collaborations at the same time. The result of this experience can be found in the collections of dozens of companies, timeless objects and furnishings, always modern and sought after, representative of a design vision that goes beyond the assignment received, an innate ability to leave a personal mark in any project. In the contract sector, in addition to the spectacular shop windows and fittings for Cartel and Foscarini, the Gold Lounge and restaurant for Dolce & Gabbana is renowned all over the world. Alongside the most known brands, Ferruccio Laviani cultivates the will to devote his creativity both to niche companies such as M. Mobili and Fratelli Boffi, the love for classic furniture reinterpreted with irony is always alive, and extra sector brands. Hennessy chose him for the new shapes of Paradis, the top-of-the-range cognac produced by the famous French brand.
Una miscela blend.
A blend from east to west, a full-body coffee with Ferruccio.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you in particular for inviting me to this chat.
Ferruccio, 3 years ago, you mentioned your first meeting with Achille Castiglioni. And I remember it seemed a bit over the top. Let's say that being over the top is not a characteristic of yours. Can we?
Well, I think you can see that it doesn't belong to me. Certainly, Achille had a very different personality from what you might have expected in a lecture at a university. He was a bit chaotic compared to when you meet him in person. But I think that this is usually what happens when you idealize a person in your mind. They can be a comedian or someone else, that when you meet them, they have a totally different attitude. Achille wasn't an easy person, and he wasn't always as nice as he seemed generally. On the other hand, he had two different personalities. One that was a far public character, and the other was a more personal and professional relationship. Consequently, you discover new sides of a person that are not so easy, and I wasn't in a position to judge this character because he was Achille Castiglioni, and I was nothing. There was not even a middle ground between our relationship, and as a result, our relationship wasn't that smooth at the beginning. Then I have to tell you that, apart from the professional issue, with me he was a person who proved to be very bold, but very helpful, and I would never have expected it from a person as rigid as him. Certainly an incredible character in some ways, a great master.
There are characters that fascinate and attract at the same time. Episodes or experience and encounters like the one with Achille. Do you remember others throughout your career?
Certainly there was another encounter that was not exactly the best. It was the one with Sothis. As a student, I spent a lot of time in training to accomplish my design approach, and also doing Memphis for 2 years. And my ideal was Sothis' industrial designer for what had been his experience in Olivetti, both for the machines and for the furniture with synthesis, and a little bit for what he represented from the artistic and poetic point of view. I finished university in 1983 and started the School of Design at the Polytechnic in the same year. And these were the first years in Memphis. So for me, this was the reference. You know, when you're young, you still look at all these alternatives around you. There was Memphis on one side and Alchemy on the other. So there were the two factions. One was Alessandro Mendini's faction. The other was Sothis' faction. I certainly felt much more attracted by a poetic and aesthetic taste that was that of Hector, much more than that of Alessandro. When I started working with Michele De Lucchi, it was the first time I met Ettore. It was one of those occasions that left me quite intimidated because he was certainly a very complex person with whom I could enter into resonance. Ettore was the leader behind Memphis, so De Lucchi was directly under his tutelage, and consequently so was I. So the relationship with Ettore, we collaborated in many ways. Indirectly through De Lucchi or on other projects of Sothis or Sothis and Associated. It was always quite complex. For example, this did not happen with Vigo Magistretti, who is instead a great character, and with whom I share anecdotes, especially related to the early years when I worked in Cartel, and I began to know this generation. At that time, it seemed that I didn't belong to that generation, and that I was not so close to the mindset. However, with Vico, I immediately developed an affection, and an easier, intimate, and even more relaxed relation. Of course, people like that always make you anxious. You don't know how to react, you don't know how to interact with them. And a person like Vico was absolutely fun and incredible. Madalena de Padova, I can tell you, was another absolutely incredible encounter. Funniest person I have ever met in my life. Despite what was said, she was very bad. The approach with Madalena was difficult, even though I was introduced by Achille, whom at the time was Madalena's consultant, both for the shop and for the products. For the first 3 years, every time Achille calls her for an appointment, and I would be the one who would go meet her, she would ask me, "Who are you? The interior stylist?" No, look, no. One more time. And every time I came there, she finds an excuse to send me back, until we finally managed to talk and work together. And from then on, I have to say that afternoons with Madalena were the funniest moments, because we talked for half an hour of work and for the rest of the time about something completely different.
I know very well your attachment to your origins, and we used to talk about it behind the scenes. Then, the Cremona countryside, the aunt who prepares you large stocks of marubini. Here, how do we place this side of Ferruccio within a world that is increasingly global?
I don't know. I have to say that going back to where I came from, back to the countryside, almost seemed to me that I was getting old. I think for the many people who have lived, especially in the first part of their life in the countryside, there is always a sort of hatred and love towards what is the province, more than the countryside in the strict sense. Also because from an aesthetic point of view, you can love, adore, like or dislike the countryside. Perhaps the real problem is linked to the province and the mentality of the province, which I do not criticize, but certainly once you get out of the context, you begin to unfortunately see negative sides, but also positive. I do not want to point it out. It is certainly easier for me to see the negative than the positive ones, and it is certainly something that has marked me, because I lived there for many years, and I still return there. A good part of the family still lives there, so it is something present.
Non ho questo spirito bucolico per cui dico che mi manca, eccetera. È stato credo 2 settimane fa, sono andato appunto a visitare mia madre e era una giornata.
So I say I miss it, but for example, a few weeks ago I went to visit my mother. It was a great day. You see green fields and it seems like the most beautiful place in the world, and and you have two thoughts about it. But then you remember what it is like in autumn, and for the other 6 months of the year, it's all agricultural, plowed. It's not like the countryside in France that always has this green and hilly aspect. In September and October, when you start plowing and everything becomes brown with bare trees, which can also have their romantic side, it's very difficult, it's very hard, and even extreme from the point of view, in my opinion, of the personal influence on feelings, on your way of being. So it's kind of hate and love relationship. The fact of admitting and not admitting that you like it and you're attached to it. Also, the fact that you want to forget it. Even when you come back, you feel that you have much more relationship with that place that you want to admit. And this is certainly a thought that the more time passes, the more it becomes true. Then it is logical that as long as you have family that ties you to that place, you cannot detach yourself, even if it is true that I consider myself more urban in some ways. I love the city very much. I have to say that when I came to study in Milan, my vision of what the city used to be completely different. Because even just thinking about Cremona, when I was a student there and going back and forth every day, I realized that Cremona always had that provincial air of a big town, but it wasn't a city or a metropolis. Milan, especially in the 1980s, as you can imagine, has completely changed my perception of what living in an urban fabric is and what such a city can offer you. Nowadays, I would have a hard time not having it. I certainly try to balance the fact that when I'm in Milan, for example, I do a lot of work and other things, and when I can, I organize a weekend getaway to return a bit to neutral pH, and then start again when you return.
Far decantare un po' tutto quello che hai dentro e un po' riazzerare, ritornare un po' al pH neutro, diciamo, per poi ricominciare di nuovo quando ritorni. Però non ho questa avversione nei confronti della città, non riesco nemmeno a...
I don't have this aversion to the city. And I can't be negative, but living in the country, I don't know if I could put it among the things that I want more. With all sincerity, I don't know.
Nelle cose che desidero di più, ecco, con molta sincerità.
But this attachment to the regions can play an important role on the creative side. Does it help you to unleash a creativity that we then find in your project or...
The rural heritage, especially from my mother, who is the first of 11 siblings of a country family living in a farmhouse. And then also the fact that my parents were often away. So I lived a lot with aunts, relatives, and grandparents. It's certainly something that gets under my skin. So this being extremely realistic and concrete in the projects, even if you make some pandemic flights, but you still have your feet on the ground, is definitely something that comes from there. And that I have left, in the sense that whatever I do, even if it may seem superficial, in reality is always something concrete. And this I think you can see in the projects, and certainly is part of my origins. My family had two different characters. My mother, who is from Cremona, and therefore farmhouse, land, farmers, and peasants. And my father from Brescia with an entrepreneur's mentality. He considers that the Cremonese and the Brescians have never been well seen. So there has always been a bit of this family friction when one of them had to criticize the other's family. My father was a painter who then enrolled in high school when he was 40 years old, working during the day and studying at night, and then enrolled in his first year university. He was a person who at a certain point decided to play the wild card and do anything. And I think this typically Brescian imprinting represents something that I have very much left. For example, one of my personal roots, which I never valued so much because then living in Cremona the agricultural context prevailed more, was to look more and more like my father. Over the years, I had the need to recover that relationship with Brescia and with all the family context that comes from that area, which I never sought nor wanted because I did not feel the need. This is an aspect that I think is very important and has had a great influence on my character and the way I see things.
Alright, we leave the countryside and we are catapulted into a completely different dimension. Citing the Settimana Enigmistica, and maybe not everyone knows that, our friend Ferruccio has been a DJ.
Detta così sembra uno che andava in discoteca a mettere sui dischi.
You make me sound like a guy who used to go to a disco and play records. It's true enough, I did that too. I'm not ashamed of anything and never say never. It was an important moment, and I must say that I probably would have also continued with that career, that in the last years of university had also become professional, in the sense that I was working on one of the first radio stations on the international circuit, which was Radio Music Boy, the radio of a magazine that was part of the Editoriale Monello that had established its headquarters in Milan, and that had acted as an intermediary to meet Linus, with whom I worked because he was there 3 times a week in Cremona, and we met because we had activities to do together. And from there we always stayed in touch. At a certain point throughout this phase, my father told me that it was a gypsy job and that I needed to become an architect. We have to make a small parenthesis, however, saying that I never thought of doing my job, and I think this is very important to say. I've never been the one who at the age of 7 dreamed of being an architect or a designer. I've never been particularly interested in it, which may sound a bit ugly when you say it like that. Luteria, which is the first school I went to, I chose it mainly because I didn't want to go to a high school for science or classical studies, or surveyor, which were the schools my father was pushing me to start, giving me a direction to my life. I chose violin, not because I was interested in making violins, but because at the beginning of the 70s, it was the only school in the world that produced violins, and people from all over the world arrived in a city like Cremona with 60,000 inhabitants. And it was the only way you could interact with people who had a different culture, a different physicality, and a different way of seeing the world. Now, it seems like a triviality said in the days of the internet or nowadays, but back then, there was no alternative to all this. That was the first choice, then being little able and not being able to make a violin at all, and having had the luck that the same school, having a carpentry workshop, had decided to make a furniture designer department that could use the same parts of wood used to make violins. This was the first stroke of luck. The big problem then was that violin making was a professional school of 3 years and did not allow access to university. Second stroke of
un dipartimento, diciamo, di disegnatore mobile e che potevano utilizzare lo stesso laboratorio che veniva utilizzato per tagliare i pezzi di legno del violino, per sgorgare tutto quanto. Perciò quello è stato il primo colpo di fortuna. Poi lì
the same year that I finished my 3rd year, they put it in a classic integrative 2-year period, which gave me access to university. What happened then, I didn't want to do architecture. I wanted to be an Egyptologist. I wanted to go to Venice to study Arabic. At that time, I was the only one with Oriental languages, and there my father vetoed it. He said that it was out of the question and that I should follow what my friends were doing. All my friends, at least those who had continued, did architecture, and the choice was on 3 places. Venice, if you wanted to do more pure architecture. Milan, where there was a mix between architecture and design, even if design was not yet strong. And then there was Florence, which was the most alternative, more linked to DAMS, and these schools more of culture than professionals.
vicino al DAMS e a tutte queste scuole un po' più di cultura più che professionali.
Milan was closer to Cremona, so I decided to go to Milan. But this too was a completely random choice, as was the choice of design. I finished university in a hurry. The teacher got sick. A friend of mine told me about this private design school in Milan, and when I went to my father to present him with the opportunity, even though it was really expensive, he said it was the last investment he would put on me. If I wanted, I could choose it, but then that was it. And so it was. And it was my stroke of luck. And if you want, also what allowed me to do what I do today, even though I think I could have easily been a doctor, an accountant, or something else today.
Beh, un po' diversi, però ci sei
Well,
arrivato, diciamo,
a little different,
per
Oath.
scelta, ma
And in the end, you got there not by choice. But anyway, are you satisfied, or would you have seen yourself in a different kind of professional role, like the accountant?
The problem is that having never had a precise aim on a job, it is not that today I would have a hard time seeing myself as an accountant, except for a certain kind of formality that does not belong to me, either the doctor or the lawyer. Let's say that the only thing that saved me is that I always drew and drew quite well. I believe that this was the only common denominator, the fil rouge, which linked all these experiences, and which then led me to do the work today that I love, and which, to this day, I would not change for anything else. What I want to say is that I did not have the vision of Sao Paulo on the road to Damascus. Despite the fact that when I was 13 years old, when I was in violin making school with a furniture design department, I saw Achille Castiglione for the first time because he had been invited with his brother to what is the Cremona Freight Exchange, where they still sell cattle at the fair and market, to make a presentation of his own. I still remember with a bow. And in that first time I remember saying, oh, what a bizarre guy, and what strange objects he makes.
E quella è stata la prima volta, se vuoi, che ho visto lui e dicevo che bizzarro questo qua e che oggetti strani che fa. Quello è stato, se vuoi, il mio primo incontro con il design.
That was my first encounter with design. From then on it was really all a coincidence, and I feel lucky.
Okay, now from Milan we take a plane and we go to the east, Japan, or more to Brazil.
Sono due parti della mia vita con due periodi diversi, nel senso che il Giappone certamente.
There are two parts of my life in two different periods, in the sense that Japan has certainly been an incredible experience, also because we're talking about Japan from the mid-80s until the 90s, when I left Michele and started working alone, and Brazil from 93 basically until 2000. Two completely different worlds and two completely different experiences. Japan in the 80s, when I worked and was partner in the studio with Michele, was the El Dorado for all of us, in the sense that there was a cultural fervor. There was also fashion with all the Japanese minimalism, Rei Kawakubo, Bionji Yamamoto. There was a vague nouvelle. It was an interesting place to work and develop good clients. I used to go there often. And the funny thing is that in the last 5 years at the Lukis, I had this Japanese assistant called Sanae, with whom I used to go to Japan when we had to see the yards. But she was also a very nice woman from the world with whom I had fun, as rarely happened in my life, because I must say, she seemed more Neapolitan than Japanese. She adored Italy and would never leave. When she arrived, I remember that I asked her what she wanted to do, and she said, well, I want to marry an Italian. She started with that idea. She didn't succeed, but I must say that she had a lot of fun anyway. So with Japan, I had a beautiful relationship. It's a country that I find wonderful. Also, this year I've been there for not too long period, where I went to see some places that I had seen during my travels. And I must say that it's always a place that opens your mind and your eyes. It's such a different mentality from ours that it permeates every aspect of life. It's in architecture, in space, in nature, and it really represents a journey that is hardly comparable to another. Brazil, on the other hand, is a different story. It all starts from a great friend of mine, Giovanni Bianco, who is one of the most important art directors and graphic designers in the world. He did Madonna's covers rather than fashion campaigns with Dolce & Gabbana or others, always working with the greatest fashion photographers. In '93, for one New Year's Eve, he invited me to take a tour of Brazil with a ticket called Brazil Pass that included 5 stops. Just leave and return to the same place without ever coming back. So from Rio, we went to São Paulo. Then I had done all the Northeast, and the last stop before returning to Rio and then to Italy was Salvador de Bahia. And there opened a way. To make a long story short, I got engaged in Brazil and disappeared for over a month. All the others, who in the meantime had returned to Rio and Italy, since there was no mobile phones, were panicking, thinking about everything, whether they had killed me, sliced me up, or I was somewhere lost. While I was so happy and I didn't care about anything that happened. I also had very few clients in Italy at that time, and that's when this love for Brazil started.
Ho detto, Dio, dove siamo? Comunque, per farla breve, mi sono fidanzato in Brasile, sono sparito per 1 mese e mezzo con tutti gli altri che nel frattempo erano ritornati a Rio e erano ritornati in Italia, non c'era il cellulare e tutto, perciò nel panico, pensando che mi avessero ammazzato, fatto fette o fossi da qualche parte. Così io devo dire ero talmente felice che non me fregava niente di tutto quello che succedeva. Avevo anche pochissimi clienti in Italia allora e da lì è partito un po' questo innamoramento del Brasile. Quello è successo che quando sono ritornato in Italia da questo periodo, diciamo, da questi 2 mesi sabbatici.
Then, when I came back to Italy after these 2 sabbatical months, Giovanni, who had understood that I wanted to come back to Brazil, told me that if I wanted to, he could at least find a way to pay for my tickets. Since he had recently acquired as a customer a big Brazilian fashion brand that was Forum and Triton 2545, a big producer and acting as art director that had to make the restyling of all the stores and wanted to involve me in the operation. So I went to Rio. Among the other things, Giovanni had to make a presentation of the first catalog he had made, and it was called 24 Horas. And I did this setup with some balls and projections in the middle of the lagoon, and the whole setup of the party, and the customer was very happy, so much that he showed me other possibilities to work in Brazil. And from there, I started going back and forth, and sometimes I was more in Brazil than in Italy. I was leaning on Giovanni's home office in São Paulo, and then at the weekend I flew 3 hours from there to Salvador. It was not so easy, but I had another age. I think I did about 50 stores in that period, where I also learned a little bit what distribution meant. And this experience, despite being very local, was useful to me when in '97 we opened the first cartel store. Also, the fact of making a concept that could be applied around the world, the fact of organizing, which for us was not so normal because in Italy you were used to always have street shops, and to get into different problems of the big distribution, it helped me to understand how to manage the whole retail part. And in the meantime, the work in Italy has grown, more and more present, so I had to let some things go.
Per capire come gestire ad esempio tutta la parte del retail. Nel frattempo è cresciuto il lavoro in Italia, sempre più presente, e da lì ho dovuto un po' lasciare andare le cose.
Diciamo che la moda o comunque questo legame.
Let me say that fashion, or at least this link with the word even more fashionable than design, has always had a presence and allowed you to build a creativity and design certainly wider than other colleagues, right?
Sì, lì c'è anche lì, come sempre io dico, la mia vita è un po' come la scelta del mio lavoro, è stata tutta una casualità. Alla fine, all'inizio, i primi lavori fatti con la moda erano...
As I always say, life, like the choice of my job, was all an accident. At the beginning, the first work done with fashion, apart from Forum and Triton, was with Missoni, where I met Angela, who at that time had just closed, together with her brothers, a joint venture with Marzotto, which was Missoni, who was also followed by Giovanni from the point of view of image. I started to make shop concepts for them. While the very first work on fashion, as far as I was concerned, and which gave me visibility, was with Piombo. The first Piombo shop that was in Via Spiga, in a small alleyway, was a shop that at the time, we are talking about the end of the 90s, in which there was the triumph of minimalism and the procession to go to New York to see Calvin Klein's shop that represented the mecca of what was to be the new architecture between Posen and Silvestrine. So on this architectural impact and on what was the image, the shop I had made from Piombo was completely the opposite. I had completely removed what was the finish of the architecture. So it was a rough shop. Instead of the floor, there was concrete, the walls were peeled, and I had designed tiles that supported all the technical part of lighting and air conditioning, even if it could seem a place of occupation, where the real characterization of the space was given by the colors and furniture. My concept was that you could go with the yellow carpet, an armchair, and a hanger and place them either in a shop or in an airport, and you understood that lead was there. And I have to tell you that it was a very innovative concept. Not that I want to give me any bragging rights, but it was a very strong concept, and if you want, even countercurrent with respect to what was happening then. And that was the element that gave me a certain kind of visibility. The visibility was the one that, being a store that had a destination in Milan, and that Massimo's product was actually very interesting because it was an attitude on color, on the tailoring a bit English revised in an Italian Neapolitan way, as made in Italy, allowed me to be called then by Stefano and Domenico that I knew before. And then they called me. At the end, we were already friends, and we even had a round of friends who knew each other. Of course, they had noticed that they had bought a series of pieces that I had designed. In this case, they were for M. Mobili, and they said, well, instead of buying them, it's quicker to draw them for us. And so the work on Dolce & Gabbana was born.
Trovavano penalizzante un po' sul prodotto, perciò all'inizio ho cominciato a lavorare nella scatola vuota.
From light as a complement to car, Claudio Luti said that with the Cinquecento cartel project, they were very much inspired by the kabuki lamp you designed. How do you feel seeing strokes and expression of the lamp inside the interior of the car?
Beh, è stata un po' una scelta naturale quella che la Cinquecento cartel fosse comunque...
It was a bit of a natural choice that the 500 cartel was inspired by that lamp anyway, because kabuki had a rather complicated gestation. When I designed it, I just wanted a lamp that could have a shape by working the material as little as possible, and then playing on this texture that is then the structure. And above all, I wanted for the first time that it was a completely plastic lamp, a floor lamp. So we're talking about an object about 1.80 meters high. Let's say that in the various researches to understand how to industrialize it, what we have discovered is that the technologies that allow injection molding with a good quality, that kind of size, are those of the automotive, of car dashboards. So what we did was to turn to an automotive mold manufacturer and start working with him. And he is still the one who made the lamp, so there was already this connection because we explicitly went in the direction of the design on the dashboards. Moreover, I never would have expected that this lamp, from the point of view of image, would become so strong also from the point of view of cartel's communication that it would make the general image of the company become a little bit a cartel point too. That is, here is a new moment of experimentation on plastic, not only in terms of image, from the graphic and formal point of view, but also linked to the research of new materials such as bioplastics and recycled plastics.
Ma anche naturalmente legato poi alla ricerca invece anche tra l'altro di nuovi materiali come le bioplastiche e quant'altro, e plastiche riciclate. Quando ci hanno chiamato la prima volta, appunto sono andato nell'appuntamento come referente di cartel.
When they called us the first time, and I introduced myself as Cartel's referent, the first object they showed me was the lamp, and they told me they wanted something like that. I wanted to go a bit further, but they wanted to be very precise about the project, because in the end, I was talking to people who don't talk about design every day. That image was very strong, and for them, it was just the way Cartel was communicating the product. And so making this capsule, this Cartel 500 co-branding, had to be something extremely easy to understand and to associate with both brands. So I started to rework on the image of what was generally a Fiat 500, using, if you like, a little bit what were the styles and patterns of this texture, which is what gives life to the lamp. I must say that the transition was also quite natural, to transpose it from an illuminating object to a series of finishes on the vehicle.
We can almost consider it as a case history, in which the product design itself borders on other areas. It doesn't just stay at home, but goes even further.
I really like that there is this interdisciplinarity and interchange between the elements. I was just talking about fashion and art interacting. I like it when things go one way, come in, come out, and continue to evolve, because I think it's also the only way to move forward.
Thanks, Ferruccio. It was a nice long coffee. We left walking through the countryside of Cremona. We enjoyed this certainly full-bodied blend from Japan to Brazil and returning to Milan. Finished on a Fiat Cinquecento. I would say that how do you prefer to enjoy a decaffeinated coffee in the afternoon? Here, there was really very little decaffeinated, indeed.
So, thanks Ferruccio.
Thank you very much, and we'll see you for the next coffee.
Absolutely.